This is a Taste Feed podcast where we not only seek to know God and make Him known, but also to honor Him in our daily living. Today we will be talking about stewardship and fulfilling God's calling in our lives. And with me, I am joined with two gentlemen. They are going to introduce themselves and then we will pick it up from there. So we'll start from my left and then my right.
So greetings in the name of the Lord Jesus Christ. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening. All depends on the time you're watching us from. I am Fred Minor, a co-host here, and cannot wait to dive into today's conversation. Welcome to our podcast.
Okay.
Awesome. Good afternoon, good morning. Jenga is my name. Excited to be part of this conversation and looking forward to hearing what God has for us in terms of just understanding the concept of stewardship and what it means for our Christian living.
Okay, awesome. So as my name is Dorcas Kimeli, and I am also a co-host here, and Jenga is joining us as a guest. And before our first question, we would probably want to understand what stewardship is and what it means personally to all of us. So maybe before even Jenga comes in, maybe Fred, you can share with us your understanding of stewardship and what it means to you personally, and as a responsibility to honoring God. How does stewardship integrate in your life in that line?
Generally, when I think about the word stewardship, I usually think of three things, which is time, talent, and treasure. And I'd usually relate it to the parable of the talents. You know, growing up, tumeshikusikia parable of the talents, but it's when I grew up that I learned it was not talking about talents. Like their talent is a form of measurement. It's something like God has given you to safeguard. So God can even give you your spouse. Your spouse can be your talent, your time, your treasure, anything God has given you, how you can guard it, use it for His service. That's what we call stewardship. Yeah.
Awesome. Jenga?
I think I borrow a lot from what he says in terms of stewardship. Just that understanding that really you don't own anything, and what God has done is invite us to technically manage whatever is His on His behalf, and definitely on His terms. Yeah.
Awesome. So based on what we've said, there's he's talking about the talents, and there's also the verse, I think it's Psalms 24, that it says that everything on earth is God's. And in line with that, knowing that even you yourself belongs to God, and everything that has been given to us is God's, and that we are just but stewards. And so how does that exactly play out in your reasoning, how you approach life, daily, kila siku kabisa? I remember kama leo when we were being taught about planning your life. So as you plan your life, making your nitaamka nifanye hivi, you have a dream house, you have a dream car, there's a career that you have always wanted to pursue. How does that now integrate to how do you now pair it ama integrate doing it for Christ, ama prioritizing taking care of it as a steward, as opposed to doing it for personal gratification. Yeah. I don't know whether you're getting my question.
Kabisa. There's a lot of depth into that. But I'd say having that kind of understanding typically humbles your own identity.
True.
You come to understand that everything you have really isn't yours. You're more of just a vessel God decides to use. So something when we talk about identity, it's so broad. When you ask the question, who are you? There's a person who can answer that question and say, I am an intellectual guy. I am a gifted Christian. I am a talented person. But having that sort of understanding of stewardship, itakufanya uelewe, I am none of those things. My identity is actually rooted in the fact that I am a child of God. And all these benefits that I get them because I'm a child of God. That's solely my identity. So all these gifts, my intellect, my wealth, my anything I have, I will use it not for my own personal gratification, but for God, since I am His child. And I think it also gives you a sense of peace. You're just at peace, whether you have it or you don't have it. You learn that I'm not validated by the fact that I have it. It gives you a sense of peace. Yeah.
Okay. Is there anything you want to add?
No, I liked when you said that not only the resources, but even ourselves are his, and sort of bounces back to what Ephesians 2:10 talks about, of works that were ordained before the foundations of the earth. And practically then it means that even before I showed up, God really had an idea, what am I prepping Jenga for? What exactly do I want him to be? What do I want him to do within his short span on this side of eternity? Then in a literal sense, then that what means is that you're in a continuous game of seeking, almost chasing after him, trying to understand, fine, here I am. What is it that you created me to do? Because your happiest version is your version that's most aligned with whatever he called you to do. If he created you a cup and you're trying to probably be a mic, you might pass some sound. You remember those mics we used to have in primary school for sound experiments? But really, you are most optimal when you're most conformed to his perfect will for your life. So it's a heart that's humbled and continually seeking for direction and malleable enough to allow the potter shape us into exactly whatever he intends for us.
Okay. So like in line with now God shaping us for whatever he's calling us to do, when he talked about gifts and talents, how do we integrate our gifts and talents? Like how do we use them purposely for like God? And is there like a specific way that the Bible dictates that I don't know, let me just start again. For example, myself, I know my gifts and strengths. I know there are things that I am required to do by the virtue of being a Christian, like things like evangelizing to people, like it's like given, it's standard. But maybe I don't like talking to people, like I don't like talking to strangers, or like so. Where is the place of living your life as a steward for Christ, as well as balancing with your personality, or maybe harnessing your gifts and strengths, versus realizing that maybe as a person, I have weaknesses in this area, while still acknowledging and realizing that you need to live for Christ you need to be a good steward of whatever God has given you, but still like usifeel pia your pressure, you have to do everything, but also making sure that you're working on your strengths for like to be excellent in whatever you're doing. Like how do you balance that as a person?
Yeah, I like the concept of balance, but once in a while I feel like it's very dichotomous. It makes it this side and this side. But part of what I appreciate as God's wisdom for man is the creativity with which he made all of us, different gifts, different passions. And I come from the school of thought that believe that it's okay to thrive at certain areas and almost feel as if certain areas are not, your niche. The foundations remain clear on what's expected of us, the fact that we should proclaim the gospel. One will do it with ease on a pulpit with a microphone, one will do it with ease as a relational conversation with a colleague at work. But now when you ever think through the calling for stewardship, I feel sometimes it's broader than our Christian disciplines, because the first time the whole stewardship concept comes up in the Bible is right after creation. Adam and Eve, they picture the Garden of Eden, and this is the garden, take care of it. And you almost see how stewardship is passed on to them is very, what are your basic mundane day-to-day things? How are you ensuring that when you pitch up at work and you're having, to teach those students or to probably see those patients, how are you actively engaging them, realizing that you're doing it on behalf of their creator, who is God? Whenever you have to do, every nitty-gritty, such that you never feel that your stewardship gear is on when you pitch up at church and are serving, and you feel you less of a steward when you're having to change your baby's diapers at home. Truth is, children are a heritage from God. We just call to steward them. I have a son, a little boy, Philip, who, to me, every time I look at him, it's God knew him before he was formed in my wife's womb, meaning that he precedes our love relationship with my wife. So he's God's property, probably in our hands for 20, 25 years before he goes into whichever part of the universe God has launched him into. And for me, it's how do I remain faithful in that? Probably 3/4 of what I'm doing to him right now has nothing to do with preaching. I'm changing his diapers helping him not to stand on the seats when there are visitors. But all those things to me are elements of stewardship. So I never feel like if I'm not preaching, I'm not doing it. But again, if you then find very clear call-outs from scripture that appeal to your conscience and you feel there's an element of struggle, they then become areas of conversation with God. You're like, God, I'm reading this devotion. I see you calling me to make disciples. I'm not seeing clarity on how I am doing it. Guide me. And for as long as your heart is authentic in its pursuit, God will always have a way. That's why he says the branch that bears fruit, he prunes that it may bear more. Meaning that even those who are bearing fruit have capacity to even go further. But it's a journey. It's not an on-off switch. Yeah.
Is there anything you want to add?
That was so brilliantly said. I'd probably add a few. I like how you guys have mentioned the aspect of different gifts, different personalities. I just add that God does not use us in spite of our personalities. God uses us through our personalities. It's interesting how you've mentioned how each of us are wired creatively in a different way. So I'd say something for that would be a good moment of self-introspection, understanding yourself better, looking into your personality. Am I introverted? Am I extroverted? Because we can have the same gift, the same thing we've been given to steward, but we are different. And God can use us differently. He can take your gift and use it to minister, let's say, to the elderly. And he can take another person's gift, the same gift, and use it to maybe intercede for the deaf ministry. Different people, but it's the same gift. So just add that God does not use us in spite of our personalities, but he uses us through our personalities.
Awesome. So in line with the two that you've shared, maybe a follow-up question would be, like, in our day-to-day lives as believers, as students, as people at work, like, how best can we apply or be good stewards of our jobs, our studies maybe. And I'm reminded of a time at work. There's this time, so where I work, Njengaro is where I work. I know where he works. So there's this time we were getting samples from Uganda, and then so there's a standard way of doing things, and then there's the substandard way that people tend to do things. So kuna hii siku yenye sample imeingia and then ilikuwa substandard, and then apparently, so I knew the person mwenye ametuma, and naonanga status zake, so huwa ana post status za watu wa kuhubiriwa. So there's this time I was so fed up, nilikuwa zileza si msichana hata anaendanga kanisa, nilikuwa zileza so the other lady was like, so what? So there's a way in which you're supposed to behave if you are a Christian. So in line with that, how exactly are we supposed to be good stewards in our daily lives? Is there a way in which we should program our minds, ama inafaa kukua okay, because me I imagine, as long as there are things you just do, not really because it's first because it's the right thing to do, and secondly, as a Christian kuna tu vitu wezi fanya, there's a way in which we just have to behave. So maybe for you, at work, ama we have gone through school together, so your studies, you're still in school, how exactly do you are you a good steward? If maybe I should have asked first whether you think you're a good steward, but I believe you are. So how do you do it?
Am I a good steward? That's a good question. I would say I'm a good steward, but I say all these things in God's grace. How do you make yourself a good steward at your place of work? I'd have to quote Colossians 3:23, which says, whatever you do, work at it with all your heart, as though you're working for the Lord and not for mere man. So yes, I'd actually agree with your point in that there's a certain way Christians are supposed to do things. It's not like a perfectionist sort of way, but it's from the point of understanding I'm not doing this for my personal gain or really I'm doing it for a greater good, which is serving Christ. So I'm doing it as though I was serving him. If I was to give an example of Daniel in the Bible, that man was a man of integrity, a man of valor, that even when his enemies tried to find a mistake in his thing, the only thing they could attack was his faith. They tried attacking his job, how he does, they couldn't. So I'd say there is a way in which you're supposed to be programmed as a Christian to put a touch of excellence for the glory of God. Awesome. So I'd say that makes you a good steward.
Awesome. Njenga.
I love that reflection from Colossians 3:23 because it's my most active verse when I think about how a believer should conduct themselves at work. And the writer argues that we're not serving mere men, neither should we live as if serving our earthly masters by eye service. And if you think about the whole concept of eye service, think about how you behave when your manager is assessing your work or looking at you. Then take that thoroughness and appreciate that your actual master is God, who is all-seeing. Meaning then the invitation is, how do you work conscious of the fact that God's all-seeing? Then you go to the subsequent verse and he mentions, your reward is not of men. Your reward, you will receive an inheritance from the Lord. And so it almost becomes, how do you, one, rework your perspective of reward from labor to be beyond a salary? Because most of us, you probably think, yeah, man, I need to work hard. I need to go the extra mile. Then you hear, but that's beyond my pay grade. That's usually a very common phrase. But fine, it could be beyond your pay grade by the standards of a master who is a man rewarding you. But then there is this God who is inviting you, telling you, work as if you're working for me. And the end result of it is that you will enter your inheritance. And to also think about work in a holistic perspective and see work as God's opportunity to impact other people's lives. Fine, I could be working where I'm working. If I do well, it's good value for shareholders. But if you think the end game of it, it's someone's held at the impact of my diligence. And that person could have struggled through the healthcare journey, and maybe that one contact point with the organization that I'm working for is what delivers their healing, their prayer. So it's to always think through beyond the measures and metrics that men have given us, because sometimes they can almost make us choose to almost tick boxes. This is what my JD says, this is what I'm doing. But beyond your JD, what are the other opportunities to show forth God's excellence in that space? Because people see, people watch, people will be like, okay, you work differently, and it gives you street cred to tell them of your Jesus. But if you're having so many blemishes, it becomes very difficult for you to witness, because the credit that makes you valid at work is not so much that you showed up in church. It's an issue of whenever you say, I'm going to do this piece of work, how well do you do it? How well are you solving problem? And can people sit and say, there's so many people, but there's something we see in Doke that makes her distinct. And even when you speak, they are willing to listen to what are your behind the scenes disciplines that make you great. And therefore it becomes easier to mention of Christ and his love and his care at that point in time. But if your work has issues, trust you me, it becomes almost the scenario where she's mentioning, like, mbono unaleta sample mbaya na najua umeokoka, like you should do better as a believer. And of course, the other point is to appreciate that, yes, we give our lives to Christ, we go through journeys of growth. Sometimes understanding work from a Christian perspective is usually not one of the common topics we have in a discipleship class. But as we grow and realize that's what is expected of us, Corinthians says it's expected that a steward should be found faithful. So it's in your JD to be faithful.
Yeah, awesome. Awesome. So as we bring this to a close, I don't know whether, Fred, you have a question for us, for Njenga, maybe.
Maybe just a small light question. What would be your one biblical example of a character who exemplified stewardship and fulfilled the promise to God? So that, at times we're usually faced with something and we're like, nobody ever, a person tells you, who do you think you are to think you can do that? Like, unajiona holy. I think as Christians, we draw a lot of inspiration from biblical characters. So who would you like, who would be your go-to?
My go-to guy would be David. The reason being, he paints a classic example of a Noah who literally gets into the space of working with God, rises to be a king, yet in his fallenness and his errors, he remains humble enough to run back to God. And even in his most, what you would almost call his pet project and legacy, which was to build the Lord a temple, and the Lord tells him, you have shed enough blood, no, you're not going to do this. You still see his heart anchored in setting up his successor for success. So it's someone who, to me, sort of just shows that by the way, if you pair up with God, there's no limit to what he can do with you. and he will literally walk you through the highs, the lows, the chaos, the joys, because he also has a lot of chaos in his life. He has erratic kids, he's in promiscuity, he's in random wars. He just has so much that doesn't sound like, it's not something we would glorify in a current Christian setup.
Sure.
Yet he just journeys with God to his end, and the testimony of God even in his death is that he was a man after his own heart.
Awesome.
Nice.
Awesome. Yeah, so maybe you can just do quick parting shots, then we close.
Okay. My parting shot would be to whatever God has given you, just that Colossians 3:23. Safeguard it, guard it, use it as though you were using it and working for him and not for mere man.
Awesome.
Simple.
For me, it's the reminder that none of us is by chance. All of us are perfectly part of God's grand scheme of how the universe ought to run. We all have a part and a lot to play in making his will on earth accomplished. You could be aware of it, you could have clarity, you could not be having clarity, but his invitation is, seek me, pursue after me, let's walk the journey together, I'll make it clear. And when you finally pitch up at home, whether Christ comes or you die, he will be like, welcome home, good and faithful servant.
Awesome. I think for me, I will take us back to this, my favorite opening statement, that here we seek to know God, to not only know him and make him known, but to honor him in our daily living. And how best we can honor him is to live our lives. Everything that we do it as though we are doing it for Christ. Yes. So that brings us to the end of this episode. We hope that it's been a blessing to you, and we hope and pray that you shall continue listening to us, that you shall continue journeying with us, and that each and every conversation that we have here will draw us closer to God in our deeds, our thoughts, and every other aspect of our lives. Until next time, see you.
See you.
Bye-bye.